A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version.
The legend of the Emshan. The steppe grass is dry. It blooms even when dry. And at once, the steppe above me, all charm resurrects. From Apollon Maikov, Emshan. When in the steppes, beyond the camp, nomadic hordes wandered. There was a Khan Otrok and Khan Sirchan, two brothers, bold fighters. The plot for this ballad, Apollon Maikov, was taken from the Volyn Chronicle of Ipatevsky list, literally following the story of the chronicler who described the victories of the Russian princes over the sworn enemies, the Polovtsians. But surprising in the story is that Khan Atrak, for whom the natives were more important than fame and fortune, looks very worthy. Why is that? Resurrect the charm of the steppe and remember the history of the ancients, and not very much else. The story of Emshan became known thanks to the poem of Apollon Maikov, who was familiar with Chokhan Valikhanov. After Vladimir Monomakh, who was an enemy and oppressed them from the north, so it was very beneficial of David the Builder to move to Georgia in large numbers of people. The brother of Atrak Sirchan referred through his ambassador to Atrak so that he returned. Chapter 1. Songs about the lives of the Polovtsian people. The Ipatevsky list is written in 5 different handwritings. Who is the author? It's still unknown. The approximate date is the beginning of the 15th century. In the 17th century, it was kept in the Ipatiev monastery, which is near Kostroma. And 2 decades later, in 1809, it was discovered by Nikolai Karamzin, right in the library of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Apollon Maikov did not just respect the legends of old, he studied them. In particular, his translation of the Lay of Igor's Warfare is still considered one of the best. He did not write love lyrics. He was fond of historical ballads. It is unknown how he came to the idea to write a poem, Emshan. It's possible this was the influence of Valikhanov. And most likely from there, the whole poem written by Maikov begins with conversations with Chokhan Valikhanov. They were good friends. Many corresponded when Chokhan was in St. Petersburg. They often met. Maikov, at that time, studied old Russian manuscripts, and Valikhanov studied Oriental ones. Maikov was so interested when he learned from Chokhan that the legend of Khan Otrok, which is in the Volyn Chronicle, is known to the Kazakhs. Many years later, this legend inspired Maikov for the poem Emshan, from Irina Strelkova, from the book Valikhanov. The ballad was published after the death of Chokhan in 1875 and immediately became popular. Emshan. In the preface, Maikov explains that it is wormwood. In the chronicles, it was Evshan. Researchers believe that the word, heard from Valikhanov, Maikov restored from memory. In Kazakh, it means healing herb. However, there are other options. Emshan, this is Zhusan. This is the Kipchak Zhusan. Without options, it's the only one. The pungent smell of wormwood is the smell of freedom. A vortex of time broke through the oaks, the empires, but the steppe grass, he only bent to the ground. So said Lev Gumilev. In the Turkish tradition, it is a herb that returns as a person to his homeland. In the Slavic tradition, this herb, which was associated with healing. It's interesting that among the healing properties, there is a belief that it helps to counteract memory loss. A bunch of wormwood was hung on the chest before a long trip or laid under the sill for happiness. And also, this is the Turkish symbol of love for the motherland. I grab my chest. Everyone looks. He's a formidable Khan. What does this mean? He, before whom all tremble, is crying, kissing a bunch of grass. From Apollon Maikov, Emshan. This holiness of the earth for them was the rod. They could die from homesickness. This is a characteristic feature of Turks. A characteristic feature of the Turks noticed by the old Russian chronicler. The legend of the grass was written almost a century after the event. Chapter 2. Only a wild wind in the open air. Suddenly a noise, and a shout, and a clatter of swords, and blood and death, and there is no mercy. All alone, like the swans, hunted down by the herd, with the Russian power of Monomakh, the all-destroying one, appeared. From Apollon Maikov's Emshan. The bells of Sofia sounded in victory. The new Prince of Kiev, the grandson of Yaroslav the Wise, Vladimir Monomakh, triumphantly entered the city. And this was a well-deserved triumph, more precisely, conquered in the beginning of the 12th century. One of the main misfortunes of the Russian princes is the Polovtsian horde, the Kipchaks. From the Dnieper to the Danube was occupied by the Kumani tribes, the most powerful. Stratum naturally belonged to the Kipchak tribes. And part of the Kipchaks who lived near Taraz left for southern Russia and Ukraine, and they settled there. They became a constant threat to their neighbors. In particular, the Kipchak Khan, Sher Khan, in the Russian folk stories, is mentioned as Kudrevanko King, or Shark the Giant, and with him Ilya of Murom fought. And in 1111, the Polovts were defeated by a united army under the leadership of Vladimir Monomakh. The news of this event reached Rome, writes the chronicles. Vladimir was a very strong Russian prince who put up great resistance to the Kipchak Khans. Sher Khan and his two sons, Atrak and Sir Khan, were forced to retreat. The Polovtsi then tried to take revenge more than once, but Monomakh was a brave military leader and a skillful politician. He became related with those whom he did not break or gave them presents. And I made peace with 19 Polovtsian princes, but gave away a lot of cattle and a lot of my clothes. And I released the best princes of the Polovtsian from the shackles, Shah Khan's two brothers, and 100 other princes, from the teachings of Vladimir Monomakh. Shah Khan died, and his sons, according to Monomakh, were ransomed from captivity. Sher Khan tried to avoid conflicts, and Khan Atrak left for Georgia. He received an offer from King David, who was recently married to the daughter of Atrak, Gurandut. This is where the real and rather long-term relations of Georgia with the Kipchaks began. And he relocated, according to a Georgian source, with about 40,000 soldiers. David fought with the Seljuks. They occupied part of Georgian territory, and he needed help in the form of a battle-hardened army. The Seljuks were knocked down, and they returned to Tbilisi, which belonged to the conquerors for 400 years, and the so-called Golden Age of Georgia began. Georgia could develop freely, well, almost for a century, and so it can be said that the Kipchaks had great merit in this victory. In Georgia, of course, there were some memories of them, and there is only one mention, that the last name was Kipchakidze. The winners were honored. The Kipchaks were given land where they settled. Chapter 3. The steppe grass is dry. To him you sing our songs. When he will not respond to the song, tie a bunch of Emshan from the steppe and give it to him, and he will return. From Apollon Maikov, Emshan. He is rich there, he's the king of those countries, owner of all the Caucasus. Life of Kipchak was in the poem works of Maikov. Indeed, the Khan was in big favor. Being a father-in-law of the king, he lived luxuried, and he even married a Georgian princess. But history did not preserve her name. Nothing is said about it in the Georgian sources, but this is not inexclusive. In 1125, Vladimir Monomakh died, and Sirkan sends a messenger to his brother Atrak with a joyful message and a request for him to return. The Polovtsian intended to settle accounts with the Russian princes. Their Russian persecutor was no longer Vladimir Monomakh. According to the legend, a messenger who went to Georgia was a Kipchak singer named Or. And Sirkan sent him, saying, "Vladimir died. Go back, brother, go to your land. Pass my words to the Atrak. Sing to him the Polovtsian songs. If he does not want to, let him smell the grass called Emshan." From the Volyn Chronicle. According to the legend, Atrak did not want to return because he lived well in Georgia. However, he may have had other reasons, not listed by the chronicler. In the same year as Monomakh, David the Builder died. His throne was succeeded by a son from his first wife, Dmitri I. He was the son of David and the Armenian queen, but the second son he had with the Kipchak princess. Tsarevich Vakhtan, the son of Queen Gurantut, was still too young. His mother, keeping the memory of her husband, became a nun and went to Jerusalem. In addition to sons, Gurantut and David had also some daughters. He asked his eldest son to take care of them, and for sure, he asked his father-in-law. So most likely it was not so easy for Atrak to leave Georgia and take away part of the army. Despite the death of David, the Kipchaks lived well, but his brother called him and perhaps really did send a bunch of wormwood. As soon as he smelled it, breathing in the wormwood, he immediately decided to return to his homeland.
Решительно решился возвращаться на свою родину.
This is a beautiful story behind which is the tragic fate of many people. The grandson of the Kipchak Khan is subsequently mentioned in connection with the unsuccessful attempt to seize the Georgian throne. What happened to the daughters of Gurantut is unknown. And suddenly, with a fist, "I'm no longer king to you from now on," he exclaimed. "Death in the land of our own is dearer than glory in a foreign land." From Apollon Maikov, Emshan. According to the chronicle, the words of the Khan sounded like this: "It is better to lie down in your own land than to be glorified in a strange one," but most likely a little differently. It's better to be barefoot in your homeland than be a sultan in a foreign land. Atrak, along with the soldiers and the Georgian princess, returned to their native steppes and continued the battle with the Russian princes. However, the son of Monomakh, Mstislav, was also a fortunate commander. According to the chronicler, he drove the Polovtsians to the Don and beyond the Volga for the Yaik. Epilogue: The glory of the times of the grandfathers. Where and under what circumstances Atrak died is unknown. There is mention that in his homeland he had a son, Konchak, from the Georgian princess. Here he was destined to restore the power of the Kipchak family of Shirokan. The chronicler mentions him as a brave warrior and that he could carry his considerable weight through the river. Konchak died at the very beginning of the 13th century. Perhaps a fragment of the Polovtsian song about the grass Emshan, written by the chronicler in 1201, is like an epitaph to Konchak. Unlike other records in which Konchak was mercenarily denounced, here he is spoken of in a benevolently commendable tone. From Svetlana Pletvava, from the book Polovtsian. Atrak in this passage is like an epic hero also. Maybe because the chronicler was carrying out the order of one of the Russian princes who was in friendship with Khan Konchak. But that is another story, the story of the regiment of Igor.